Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner. Bud, are you there? Uh-oh, we're having technical difficulties already. I'll speak for Bud. This is Bud Marr from Pittsburgh. I think we're just having some technical difficulties, so I'll say that I'm here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation and Ethics and Leadership. You can find both of those at mchs.edu and thezetainstitute.com. But out in Pittsburgh, the National Institute of Newman Studies, and they're, of course, always doing stuff with Newman in mind, but it's a particularly interesting and fun time because Newman, of course, has been declared a saint. So if you run over to their website, just type in Newman Studies, National Institute of Newman Studies, or even Bud Marr, and it will show up today. When we get Bud on, it's actually sort of apropos that we're having these issues because what we're going to talk about today is communications, media, and its role in the common good. And so, for instance, if things like the telephones mess up or the internet goes down, you can start to see how that can trip up us tech, whiz type people that are used to things working. But that's what we're going to talk about today. We have a guest from Notre Dame, the McGrath Institute. I realize we've mined the McGrath Institute a couple of times, so God bless them for helping us out. But Brett Robinson, who's the Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies, is going to be on today. I'm looking over at Jimmy, and I think that we got it all resolved. So, Bud, are you there? Bud. Uh-oh. We might be having major phone issues. Well, I'll go ahead and say we're brought to you, as always, by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Like I said, mchs.edu. We're in the middle of our summer semester, but it's already time to start thinking about fall. You can enroll at any time, fall, spring, or summer. We have programs that are traditional in person on campus, even though we get those done sooner than other people. 4 years, is typical. We can do it in 3. But you can also do the accelerated program if you have some prerequisites. But then, of course, we have certificate programs and associate ones as well. mchs.edu. All right. Hello. Fingers crossed. Bud, are you there?
I'm here.
All right.
I feel like we're facing some spiritual warfare.
I didn't know. So is this... does in the summer, does Pittsburgh have a quota system and you can only use the phone every 5 minutes or something? I
think Jimmy's messing with me. He's just trying to see if I'm at the top of my game today.
Jimmy's just trying to show us who's in charge. Who has the
we
real
can blame
power.
Pittsburgh. The lines are clogged with French fries.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, so, but out in Pittsburgh, what do you do? I threw out National Institute of Newman Studies, but then I have to admit, in the heat of the moment, I forgot your website's address.
Yeah, you can find us at newmanstudies.org. We're affiliated with Duquesne and just do all things John Henry Newman. It's an exciting time for him being canonized, so we'll be saying John Henry Newman this October.
So, Bud, I have to ask, are you feeling better than last week? You sound better because you're back in the office, but do you feel better?
I do feel better. Honestly, if I could be forthright with our listeners, the radio show is about all I did on Wednesday last week. Because I woke up in the middle of the night sick, and I was too lazy to go downstairs and get water. I'm afraid to drink the water out of the faucet, and I didn't want to walk downstairs to use the filter. So I think I dehydrated myself, and I woke up and did the radio show, and it was like in the fantasy films where the wizard performs a spell, and he's like, my power has left me.
Right.
I slept for the next, 18 hours or something.
Oh, wow. I think the devotion that you've showed to the show should have all the listeners out there realizing that they need to line up to hear Bud bring it each week. Like we were saying last time, it was like your Michael Jordan flu game, so you really hit it out.
I'm glad you caught on to that, because that's really what I've been trying to play up, sort of indirectly.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work with, your wife or something like that. When you're saying, I had the flu game at, on the radio show, she's like, oh, can you help with the kids? No, I got to go back to bed. I gave it all. I gave it all for the show.
That was 8 days ago.
I'm still in a deficit.
Honey, I'm struggling.
So, but I've already said we're having Brett Robinson on, Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies at the McGrath Institute for Church Life at Notre Dame. And so I was just talking about it. It really made sense that since we were talking about communications today, we would have communication difficulties right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's ironic. I don't know, but Brett, looking at some of what he's written online, a lot of great stuff there about technology's influence on our life, and then, he's not someone who's just like, hide in a cave, but thinking about how to use these things well.
That's right. So his book, there's, like you said, there's plenty of articles out there, but he has a book called Appletopia that's about the religious imagination of Steve Jobs and Apple computers, and so that's another place. We'll get him to talk about that on the show too, but I know you guys thinking, communications, how does this deal with the social order and the common good? It's going to be very obvious, and this is going to be a fantastic show, so I'm glad that Bud, your biological issues are in order, and then that we got our communication digital disorder arranged here at the top of the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Steve Jobs, although has a person ever had more films made about them during the first 3 years after their death?
Especially if people that
I can't keep up with Steve Jobs films.
Do not look like him. I think they were thinking about casting me for Steve Jobs when they had Ashton Kutcher. But yeah, no, I agree with you. That's right out of the gate. I'm not expecting that many biops. So like I said, folks, stick around. It's going to be a wonderful show. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner with Bud Marr. All tech issues resolved. We'll be back right after these messages.
50 years ago, tuition costs at Catholic elementary schools were mostly absorbed by parishes. Now, higher salaries for lay teachers and new technologies have greatly increased the cost for families. Hi, I'm Jean Wells at the Catholic Tuition Organization, and my job is to reduce tuition costs for families and award great tax credits to generous donors. Want to help? Please donate today at ctoiowa.org. Let's do this for the kids and their future.
Thank you to Confluence Brewing Company for underwriting Christ is the Answer with Father Ricardo, heard Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Confluence Brewing Company is a local brewery in Des Moines featuring seasonal and limited release beers. They have cans and growlers to go, apparel, and other gifts for family and friends. Live music is featured in the tap room. Confluence Brewing Company is located off the bike trail south of Grays Lake. Thank you to Confluence Brewing Company for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio on the web at confluencebrewing.com. That's confluencebrewing.com. Thank you, Blessman International, for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Everyone lives their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. How we use that time directly affects if our life will leave a significant impact or not. Each year, Blessman International leads Central Iowans on a 12-day, all-inclusive experience sharing the heart of Christ with children in South Africa. Teams are forming to do something significant in an African child's life. Learn more at blessmaninternational.org. That's blessmaninternational.org.
Hey friends, John Leonetti here. Big thanks to R&R Realty Group for underwriting my show and for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. R&R Realty Group Sierra Point Apartments are located in West Des Moines. Think granite tops, oversized windows, 24-hour health center, and heated underground parking. R&R Realty Group is locally owned by a Catholic family, a great blessing to Iowa Catholic Radio. rrrealty.com. That's rrrealty.com.
Folks, if you want to talk to us today, it's easy to do so. Always remember that we have the Zip Whip line. Yeah. 515-223-1150. That's 515-223-1150, the Zip Whip line. If you want to just text in, you can text in questions for us, and we'll make sure to answer them. And if you want to put hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good so we can make sure to find them, that's fine. You can leave questions for us to answer later. But we've had wonderful feedback from our fans through the Zip Whip line, and we want to make sure to keep doing that. 515-223-1150. 515-223-1150. We're always accepting compliments, constructive criticism, and insults of John Leonetti's show. No, I'm kidding. Of course, we're not doing that. So, Zip Whip line. So, 515-223-1150. Let's get back to the show. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you today. Des Moines, Iowa, Iowa Catholic Radio, Oklahoma radio stations as well, and anywhere that you can listen to it on podcast and iowacatholicradio.com. Today we have as our guest Dr. Brett Robinson, Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies at the McGrath Institute for Church Life at the University of Notre Dame. Brett, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Bo. It's good to hear you again.
Yeah, now, Brett, I think you're going to tell me that this is, of course, had to happen, but since we're talking about communications, we have had the buggiest craziness with equipment in the first 10 minutes of the show than maybe we've had in like 3 years of broadcasting. So I'm taking it, since you talk about technology and not always in strictly glowing terms, do you feel like the robots are against you?
It's not the robots, Bo. It's this. I think it's this legion of impish demons that follows me around as I try to, and they do get into the works and muck it up, and it's actually quite funny because it does happen way too frequently. So I'm sorry. I guess I apologize.
Who knew? So like the devil can quote scripture and the demons know how to program. That's how it works out, right?
There you go.
So Brett, one of the things that I wanted to, at the very beginning to bring up is, so first of all, I got to see one of the talks you gave about this, and it was fantastic, stellar, one of the best talks I've ever heard. And like I've told people, is sometimes we might hear communications, media studies. What's that going to have to do with the common good, social teaching? And really, to me, your talk got at the heart of the matter. But in order to talk about contemporary issues with communications and media, you bring up an ancient myth that people kind of get wrong. So, Narcissus, you bring up what it is, what the myth is, but how people read it wrong and how that goes a long way to showing our misunderstandings about communication and media in the modern world.
Yeah, it's actually something that I picked up from Marshall McLuhan, a Catholic media theorist 30, 40 years ago in Canada, who was a literary scholar by training, but got very interested in media and, in particular, its effect on consciousness and belief. And his reading of the Narcissus myth is not that Narcissus is staring at himself and in love with himself, but he's in love with this extension of himself, this image of himself outside of himself that we also experience, I think, when we engage with technology, because technology is by nature an extension of the human person. So all of our human faculties and capacities extended out into space. The hammer extends the fist, and the television extends the eye, and so on. And so our fascination with these objects is a narcissism of sorts, but not the kind that we typically associate with narcissism.
Yeah, and the next step in this to me, is the profound one where you talk about society's ills, or what, if that's the case, what we're talking about, that technology, and especially digital technology, is sort of concentrated or weaponized us, but outside of ourselves, but us being able to forget that it's us. It starts to be interesting to see what people talk about they love and hate about technology, because if that's the case, what we just got done saying, they're really talking about what we love and hate about ourselves, but
right,
sort of imaged outside of ourselves. So when we go, man, there's no civility anymore. People just attack each other. Maybe we're talking about a disorder in ourselves, or at least in our communities. Or if we can say, you have someone go, yeah, but we can reach over, great spaces, time sort of collapse. We can broadcast knowledge. Then maybe that's something, that's us talking about ourselves and what we really don't like about ourselves, and really what we hope about ourselves, but can't, so to speak, be honest about it. And so we need to talk about it through our technology.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that if you look at the Church's teaching on this, and this notion that technology is morally neutral, the tool itself can be used for good or for ill, and this for me for a long time was a perplexing statement for the reasons you just mentioned, because it seemed like there were a lot of things that flowed out of technological development that weren't morally neutral, that they were actually quite evil in some cases. But I think Pope Francis in Laudato Si really kind of completes the circle of thinking on this, which is to say that it's our morally ambivalent nature as human beings that influences or infiltrates our use of technological devices, tools, objects. And so I think you put your finger on it, which is it's our nature that's being extended. And when you look at incivility or something like that online and you say, well, and you blame social media or you blame Facebook or the programmers at Facebook, as you said, what we're really doing is we're seeing this sort of amplified version of ourselves, and it's frightening. But it does change the scale and the scope and the speed of our experience in political discourse, in religious belief. All these things begin to shift, and we saw this with the printing press 500 years ago. Because media have such a formative effect on our perception and on our consciousness, we begin to develop a new consciousness which amplifies certain things that weren't necessarily amplified before. So when Marshall McLuhan talks about electric media and digital media, he talks about the global village, which Pope John Paul II picked up in his social teaching on communication and technology. And what people miss, again, with that term is that villages aren't peaceful places. A village is a very agonistic place. Why? Because everything's happening at once. Everything is very immediate, and so conflict is very present all the time, and it has to be mediated and remediated. And again, that's why you have laws and rituals and things to sort of keep that equilibrium, because there is this inherent potential for conflict. And now with the internet, we have all entered the global village. We can all hear everybody at once, and you begin to see this sort of antagonistic drive in very amplified terms. And so I think that's what we're seeing.
Brett, this conversation reminds me somewhat of the work of Matthew Crawford, Shop Class at Soulcraft, and he's with my brief introduction to what he's written, he's a very cerebral person who talks about the impact on his life of getting back to work with his hands, and specifically, working on his own motorcycle and riding a motorcycle even. And I guess that conversation brings to mind for me, do you think there's something particularly unique or uniquely dangerous about social media and smartphones? It feels like there's an extra level of skepticism with that kind of technology. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what makes our use of a smartphone, say, different than tools that human beings have used in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be unfair to sort of demonize just smartphones and say that this somehow we passed a point of no return and now we've entered this technological kind of Black Mirror world where dystopia kind of reigns. I think I'm glad you brought up Crawford, because I think there is an antidote or a remedy to some of the excesses of being virtual and being online, which is to say, just remember you have a body. Remember you live in a material world, because these are things that begin to sort of dissolve as you spend more time online. You sort of forget your embodiedness because you can do so many things just sort of almost by telepathy with your cell phone and online. So manual practices and I think mechanical practices like working on a motorcycle are a great example of rerouting oneself in that material world. Returning to nature, making sure you have, and doctors are now saying, I think they even have a prescription, you should get 5 hours of nature exposure a week. It's funny we have to say this to people now, but this is essential to being a human being, a body in the world. And so these, I think, are some practices that bring about, I think, an equilibrium that helps mitigate some of maybe the excesses of social media. But I have to say that the motorcycle example is a good one, because I think we've been on, since the advent of industrialization, we've been on this sort of path towards more and more speed and efficiency, and the Pope talks about this in Laudato Si' too, under the idea of the technocratic paradigm, that we have this desire to sort of speed things up. We want to get things done faster, get places faster. And so if you think about the motorcycle, this is just a faster mode of human transport, which comes with its own accidents, as Paul Virilio would say, that any new technology also comes with the accident. So the invention of the airplane comes with the airplane crash. And so this speed is dangerous in some respects and can be violent. And I think the same can be said online. Because of the speed of human communication, the lack of time for reflection and assimilation of information that it kind of imposes, we get a new kind of psychological, social experience that I think is calling out for that space again, that contemplative space, that reflection, which is why I think Cardinal Sarah's book on the power of silence is so timely and powerful, is because these are the things I think we need to attend to as Catholics to live well in this world, to live virtuously in this environment.
And that reminds me, you said you bring up Laudato Si. So one of the books sort of behind Pope Francis's encyclical is a book by Romano Guardini called Letters from Lake Como. It's a wonderful book. I suggest everyone to read it. And he points out, right, it's not a matter of like saying all technology is bad in any way, but he noticed a difference. He lives the sort of life where when he was young and he went to Lake Como, people were on sailboats, and by the time he was there as an older man, they had motorboats. And he goes, look, there's a way in which human technology and nature can, so to speak, be cheek to cheek and breast to breast, right? So he goes, the sailboat goes along with the wind and the waves. We used to build houses along the crest of hills. He goes, but motorboats cut through the waves and go any way they want. And with modern housing, we'll clear out the land to make it be in a square. So he goes, the change, we've always been influenced by our tools. Sure, we needed to have opposable thumb so we could hold the hammer, but once we had the hammer, everything started to look like nails. And I think that's what starts to be interesting if we talk about the cell phone, TV, just digital media, is not only is all of this faster, not only can it cut through sort of natural barriers, but I do think it's the case, and this is where I think you get into your work on Steve Jobs. The people making those things are very mindful about how the tool changes us, and they're very they make concerted efforts to try to change us with their technology in a way that keeps us coming back. And maybe that's something too with the sort of narcissist myth, is to start to go, it's not just yes, these are neutral, they can be used in all sorts of ways, but they're certainly not neutral in why people want to produce them the way that they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. That's where I think the Pope is quite spot on in the encyclical, and I think I think this is where the demonic side comes in a sense that the technology producers are sort of speaking with forked tongues on this, because on the one hand, as you said, they're mindful of what these things are doing, and so a lot of these Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to these Waldorf schools where there's no technology, and Mark Zuckerberg's got a contract with his nanny so that the kids don't even see her using her phone. So it's not even that the kids can't use the phone; they can't even see someone using a phone because they know what happens. But then on the other hand, from 9 to 5, they are working with psychologists, and Matthew Crawford talks about this in his other book on attention, which is, they've sort of figured out or hacked sort of human psychology to find that there are these addictive qualities. Right. There are these brain chemicals that are released when you kind of present information to people as if it were like a slot machine. And what people say when they're interviewed about their addiction to things like video poker, and I think this would apply to social media as well, is this is not an addiction to winning or getting rich or the thrill of gambling. It's actually an addiction to the consistency of the machine and the predictability that when I put my quarter in, it's going to show me 3 new things, and I may win or I may lose. It doesn't matter if you ever watch people video poker gamble. They're almost expressionless whether they win or lose, because the addiction is in the repetition and the predictability, that this is the one thing in their life that they can control, that they can use. And so when you think about scrolling through social media, maybe you're looking for good news or something funny or something, but it's that repetition and that consistency and that predictability that's so comforting, and that's the addictive nature of it. And then, of course, if you do get the ping that you have a new message, or you get a laugh, you get the dopamine release and so forth. So that adds a whole other layer of addiction. But the fact that they're consciously doing this for marketing purposes, for profit, to collect data and so forth, to me, that's the part where you have to step back and say, okay, well, how do we begin to think about this from a Catholic social teaching perspective as it relates to human dignity, but also subsidiarity. You know, what responsibility do these companies have to the users in terms of disclosure, transparency, ethical use and production of these sorts of things? I think these are all open questions that the Church really is trying to engage with and should engage with even more deeply.
I think that question of the Church's response will be a great topic for the second half of the show. If I could pivot to one line that you throw out in an interview that I read from you is you share that around the birth of your first child, there was a time when you actually unplugged from most technologies. And I was intrigued by, I'd like to hear more of your experience of that. Bo and I have tried this in classes before, and we've had students get viscerally angry about, like as they're writing their reflection papers, like during the unplugged experiment, it was like emotionally trying for them. But I don't know if you'd be willing to share just some highlights from when you did this and how it maybe shifted your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to understand, how long do you guys do the unplugged experiment?
30 minutes, not much.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
okay.
30 minutes, that's it. And they go nuts.
I've heard from other teachers who've tried this on a more extended basis that there is a 2 to 3 day like visceral withdrawal period, and then there's after that though there's actually a calming period where the student actually begins to realize what they're missing, you know, now that they're detached from the device. So I think with some patience, maybe you can get them past that. But yeah, I mean, we did this with our children, or at least very seriously with our first child, and then had to find ways to compromise as the child got older and saw that all his friends were using this stuff, and how do I access it? Because you lose a lot of social capital as a kid if you don't know the latest YouTube video or the latest. But it's easier in the beginning, of course, because they have no control. You're in complete control.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess what I came to realize more and more is that you're creating an environment in a home, and that whether it's, you know, it's not just withholding or removing, you know, the presence of screens or media devices. It's the environmental effect that has on the ecology of the home. And I think, again, going back to Pope Francis and Laudato Si, I think the ecology idea, he's bringing that up because he means it more than just in a response to climate change and these sorts of things, but it's actually a way of thinking. It's a much more, I think, Catholic way of thinking of the world and the cosmos as a sort of integrated whole. So imagine your home as sort of a microcosm of the cosmos, or what have you, and that you're trying to create this environment or ecosystem that's balanced, that balances the senses. You know, you have a developing child in the home, and we as human beings have taken eons to get from just speech to writing things down to understanding literacy to now doing things electronically and digitally. So to have a 2-year-old playing with a phone, they've skipped over these sort of eons of human communication, development, and understanding. We better be prepared to explain that to them. And it's probably too late at that point, I guess, is my point. And this is what I think the Silicon Valley people are on to, is there is a sort of appropriate level of development. They've got to learn to speak, and they've got to learn to listen, and they've got to experience that with a primary caregiver, because everything from shared attention to shared gaze, all the things that an infant experiences to learn language and learn social behaviors are all part of that experience. So if you skip over that and you send them right into this sort of digital space, they forget their body, all the sort of important things they have to attend to as a child become more problematic, because you're at that formative stage. So I feel very strongly about this. I used to teach at St. Vincent, where they have the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media. They very much, I think, believe this too and take this approach seriously. We need a Mr. Rogers for the digital age, which is to say someone who is so sensitive to the effects of the media that's been so weaponized, but knows how to defuse the bomb, as it were, and use it in a way that is actually healthy for a child at the appropriate level of development and healthy for families. I think that's what the church can really contribute to this conversation.
Well, this is all fantastic stuff. We're going to go to commercial, and when we get back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Brett Robinson. Stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. But it's funny that being the conversation we're just having, but here's social media and how you can reach us. IowaCatholicRadio.com, the OG social media. You can go there and find out what we're doing on air, what we're doing throughout the diocese. Also sign up for our email list. You can go to Twitter and find us at IA Catholic Radio, or you can go to Facebook. If you put Iowa Catholic Radio, it's easy to find us, and then you can friend us. We try to put up fun pictures like, here we are at the state fair, here we are at the concert series, all the different things that we're doing. You can follow us that way, an easy way maybe to put something nice and a little bit more contemplative in your Twitter or Facebook feeds. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after these messages.
Why give to the Catholic Tuition Organization? To help families who want to send their kids to our Catholic schools and just can't afford it. Some donors like to give part or all of their required minimum distribution from their retirement account. The 65% Iowa tax credit you receive are a tax benefit you just don't want to pass up. Ask your tax advisor or contact us online, ctoiowa.org. The bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Impoverished children break everyone's heart, but poverty seems like such a big problem. What can one person do to make a difference? For 17 years, Blessman International's passion has been to connect the resources of our donors with sustainable programs that impact the lives of impoverished children in South Africa. Our donors are feeding thousands of hungry children every week, providing basic water and sanitation for impoverished communities, and sharing the love of God in practical ways every day. Go to www.blessmaninternational.org and make your donation today.
Hey friends, John Leonetti here. Big thanks to R&R Realty Group for underwriting my show and for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. R&R Realty Group Sierra Point Apartments are located in West Des Moines. Think granite tops, oversized windows, 24-hour health center, and heated underground parking. R&R Realty Group is locally owned by a Catholic family, a great blessing to Iowa Catholic Radio. rrrealty.com. That's rrrealty.com.
Vitae Family Care is part of the Iowa Catholic Radio family. Pro-life physician Greg McKernan, a DO, has practiced for 27 years, seeing patients of all ages with just about every kind of need. Dr. McKernan lives his faith as a physician and is trained in NAPRO technology, allowing him to diagnose and treat many female conditions and even markedly reduce the occurrence of a miscarriage. VitaeFamilyCare.com. Remember, Vitae is Latin for life.
Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. We have with us Dr. Brett Robinson, Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies for the McGrath Institute for Church Life at the University of Notre Dame. Brett, thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks again.
So, Brett, we ended the last, the half of the show, the first half of the show, I should say, talking about that one of the things that the digital frontier sort of does, especially in young children, is it skips developmental stages of communication. But then this goes back to the wider question, what would communications and talk about media have to do with the common good? Well, so most people should know by now, if they've listened to our show regularly, that the family is considered the most basic social unit of any society. It's not a perfect society in itself, but necessary for the perfect societies that are whole and good and complete in themselves. And what I'm getting at here is you had this wonderful point, actually terrifying, I should say, point in your talk, where you put up on the screen a baby looking at its mother and then a child looking at a screen. And you made the point that one of the sort of tricks that they've figured out how to hack into, so to speak, using our bodies and our psychology, is that the sort of mirror response that children learn primarily from their mothers is something that technology can sort of trip into. It can override that and sort of butt itself in to that sort of raw psychology that's part of our way of growing up and developing. And so it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, this is interesting for psychological reasons or the development of the individual. You were pointing out that this cuts to the very heart of how it is that we're social beings. And so for you, wouldn't you say that this is what you start to see, that it's not the technology itself or even necessarily its speed, but that if we're not attentive to that fundamental reality that this changes the basic way humans relate to each other, that's where the church is, so to speak, not doing its job letting people know?
Yeah, I think that's one of the few major areas of concern, this notion of attention. And as you point out, the attention at early stages of development is so crucial to language and social development for children. And the example I gave, as you said, was the sort of experience the child has for the first really almost 2 years of life, where the mother is not a separate self. The mother is identified as the self. The child only slowly begins to realize that he or she is an individual, and this is what psychoanalysts call sort of the mirror phase, where they say, "Oh, that's a me, and that means that's a you." And so that experience takes some time, and it's those first several months, couple of years, are so important for the child to pick up all of the sort of social, emotional, cognitive cues from the mother, who's acting as an extension of the self. And so, as we talked about at the top of the show, this notion that technology extends the self now begins to take on a more sort of nefarious character when you think about the fact that the child who's experiencing mother as extension of the self is then introduced to technology as extension of the self and begins to react or treat that experience as he or she would the mother, which is to say, this is me, and actually as adults we still have that experience, although more unconsciously, which is to say, going back to the Narcissus idea, this thing is me. Like all this stuff that I'm doing on my computer is really just an extension of my memory. It's an extension of my cognitive experience. It's an extension of my social communication through email and text and so on. And so it is very much us. But for the child, that we can make that distinction if we think about it for a moment and talk about it. But the child is not equipped with this sort of sophisticated awareness of what's actually happening. So going back to the video gambling example, the child becomes, somewhat addicted to this predictability of the machine. If I press this, it always does this. If I ask mom for this, she doesn't always give me that. So where does my affection begin to drift? Well, it goes to the thing that always gives me the thing I want. And so that's a crucial stage in human development, is understanding boundaries and all the things that mothers provide and caregivers. So I think to get to the root of this, we have to begin to talk about that stage. It's not, for some of us it's too late in a sense. We can't really do an adult re-education program on what's happening with media, but we can certainly talk to adults about what that's doing to children.
Brett, when we think about the church or churches engaging these topics, it's complex, right? And I think about Bo and I have a mutual friend, and I'm accused sometimes of wanting to take the church back to the Middle Ages. And the first time I had lunch with this guy, he was talking about how poorly churches do media outreach and things like that, and brought up the idea of having screens within the church. And I kind of just listened attentively. And then he later found out, that I was like a reactionary. But I guess when you think about, like, if you were to talk to a group like at a church, what sort of things might you say to them? Because as followers of Jesus, the kind of community life that we're drawing people into, it is, we use the word incarnational, and so many of these technologies seem to push people to a different place. But I'm guessing you're not someone who just says, like, throw it all out, move to the wilderness, stick your head in the sand.
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate sort of thing with parish, because this conversation isn't necessarily actively happening. And we just hosted a symposium here last week with some educators and Catholic media folks who work, and diocesan folks who are beginning to wrestle with this and think about how it affects liturgy and about how it affects community. And I think that's great that we're having this conversation, and Notre Dame's trying to be sort of a home for that conversation. But yeah, you can't stick your head in the sand, but you can understand the environment, and you can do what the Amish do well, which is, people like to paint them as these Luddites that don't, but they actually do use technology. But what they do first is they say, how will this impact community life? Let's assess that first. But we, in the sort of technocratic mode, often say, well, this will speed this thing along, or this will attract the teens, at least temporarily, or this will do. So there's all these sort of expedience and efficiency measures that we use that I think are the wrong measures. So we're playing a long game here. We know that with conversion and with formation and with salvation. So I think starting to have that conversation in parish communities, providing a framework for talking about it that's not morally didactic, but nor is it so neutral that sort of anything goes. So I think it's a conversation more of us should be having, and I'm so glad you guys are doing this on the show and thinking about it. But that would be my sort of recommendation is to explore this together and think about these environmental effects.
So, Brett, one of the things that in reading all of your work, that the great reversal that happens is actually not. I think it might be at a different level than people are realizing. You really point out how Steve Jobs he heralded this than other people did it, where they would take religious imagery and then use it not only for marketing. I mean, that's the easiest way to see it, but they would use the religious and the intuitive and sort of these wisdom traditions and that aspect of human life, and apply it to technology to get people to feel more comfortable with computers, to feel like all these things we said, that they're extensions of ourselves. The famous example I think anybody either remembers or can go look at is when they brought out the iPhone, it said something to the effect of like, to touch is to believe, and it was mimicking Caravaggio's Doubting Thomas touching the side of Christ, right? So, but what's funny about this is, in a way, the church, if you talk about the medieval church, we used to do the opposite. We'd go take other people's stuff and then put it at the foot of Christ, right? Well, principalities and powers, anything, we're gonna take that stuff and we're gonna make it ours. Then we have people sort of doing the reverse. They're sort of using the cachet of religious imagery, but for technological and marketing reasons. And then like you said, we start hyperventilating, and then we just try to reach out to do what it seems the good marketing people are doing. Part of this goes back to the confidence that the church realizes that Christ has already won, the victory's won. So what we need to be, like, not only play the long game, but we need to get back to stealing stuff and making it Christian. This is actually what triumphalism should look like. It's not the idea that we're better than anyone else. It's that God has given us carte blanche to go find what's in the world, break it apart, find what parts we can use for the church, and then use it well. And it just seems to me that confidence is what's lacking and why we're so reflexive when we don't need to be about these things.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I got into this 15 years ago because I read someone's dissertation, a professor at Wheaton named Reed Schuchart, back in 2005, where he talked about the medieval sort of Catholic symbol system being this the roots of modern American advertising, and it was this beautifully argued poetic sort of thing that looked at how yes, the advertising industry for the past century or more has co-opted, borrowed, stolen these symbols because they had this sort of potency that really has been drained now through overexposure and advertising. And so the church has to reckon with that many of the symbols that were held as sacred 500 years ago are now so almost cliche because of the way they've been co-opted and repurposed in advertising. I've started reading about Peter Ramus, who was a 16th century educational reformer in France, and it struck me that he has connections, I think, in some ways to people like Steve Jobs or Peter Thiel and these others who now sit at the top of these. Steve Jobs obviously has passed on, but these tech types who are really engaged in the work of education, and we like to think that that's what we do in our schools, and that's sort of a hermetically sealed thing. But actually, education is happening way more out in the world and online. Every time someone Googles something, they're learning something. Every time someone looks at Wikipedia, and so on. And so, educational reform now looks like what these guys are doing with digital media, which is to figure out how to use information in these different ways to attract and to influence political discourse and human knowledge and so on. And so I just bring that up to say that I think in this medieval comments come up a couple times that in some ways we are returning to the medieval, but unconsciously. And so what I mean by that is this environment that we're living in, which, computers are memory devices. They just store tons of information. We like to talk about how they can think or have this artificial intelligence, but really at the root, they just remember everything that we put into them. And so there is a medieval sensibility, I think, emerging that nobody would call it that, but I think this is what you might say to your friends who think you might be reactionary, which is to say, this is not like, I think the medieval is better or this sort of thing, but actually the way consciousness is being shaped now is actually more akin to the medieval than it is to the modern. And what I mean is, we're coming out of the television age, and the television age was all about fantasy and about dream it and you can be it. Be like Michael Jordan. Here, buy this product, be like this. And it was all a ruse. It was all a scam.
Wait, we can't be like the A-Team?
No, I'm sorry to break it to you.
Dang it.
You could be like Mr. T, but most people can't do that. But now we have this moment we're experiencing where our devices are rooted in memory rather than in fantasy. And so I think the opportunity for the church is that now people are starting to think, going back to Narcissus again, about themselves much more in relation to this media. So when I post this, when I write this, when I photograph that, I'm doing a kind of bricolage biography of myself or autobiography. And that means we can have some serious discussions about what that biography actually means when it comes to your identity. And if your identity is rooted in Jesus Christ, that recolors the whole record of memory, and this idea that you can't escape your past or whatever. These are all things that can be brought into higher relief, because that's how people engage with technology now, is through this sort of massive storage of their own story, of their own memories. And that's a huge opportunity, because that's a harder conversation to have in a television era when we're trying to use this movie or that show as an example of how, God works in our life. Well, that's all fantasy. That might be allegorically true in some way or analogically true, but now it's much more immediate and much more direct because it's about ourselves.
No, I like that. I mean, I think about, it's hard sometimes, like you said, the sort of weight that symbols have. I think it was Nietzsche who said this, but it might have been Kierkegaard, I'm forgetting. I'm plagiarizing someone, but they pointed out that Socrates and the early philosophers, they were the young men. We're all old, right? Like we think of ourselves sometimes as like, young because we're not in our 80s or it's not 30, BC. But actually, we have the weight of a lot of history that weighs down a lot of these symbols. So it's hard for us to realize, right, that at one point, the cross is not like the nice thing that good ladies wear on chains, at their secretary jobs in a middle-class life. It was an execution device, and to make it the centerpiece of the ecology of symbols that you used was scandalous and crazy and this huge thing to say. And so sometimes in the church, we fall into the trap of thinking like we only need to recapture obvious symbols that used to be ours, or the sort of worse one where it's like, cool Ray, hip young pastor that's like, well, Jesus is like Google or, something lame like this. What we need to be able to say is that there's actually metaphors out there that are still potent because we haven't used them yet. Like and I'm sorry for tooting my own horn here. I try to tell people, right, that the truth is a lot like a virus. It's not, so, truth is not something you just put in people's heads. You infect people with the truth because it has a life of its own. And my point to say all this, beyond the fact that I think it's right, is to say to someone that truth is more like infection than like convincing. That seems weird to them, but that's the sort of thing that the church has always done. We found those images that are stirring, and I think sometimes the best among us get in the trap that if we can't reclaim some of these things that the Steve Jobs of the world have, like you said, evacuated of meaning, then we have no hope. But that's precisely what we've always been good at, and we need to stop ceding it to the tech companies.
Right, and revisit our own tradition. I mean, there's a beautiful icon, Marian icon, that I used in one of my talks when I was talking about this notion of the shared attention of mother and child. So what that means is the infant looks where the mother looks, and so they're always following their eyes. And so if mother looks over here and is talking about this chair, well, the infant is picking up, okay, that thing over there that she's looking at is called chair, and so on. So this icon is Mary holding Christ, the Christ child. She's looking at us out from the icon. He's looking at us. And so in a way, her attention towards us, the viewer, is directing Christ's attention, the child Christ, his attention to us, as if to say, look at them, they need you. The mother saying to the child implicitly through this attention. But what's beautiful about the icon is her hand is pointing at Christ. And so for us, the viewer, who's looking at our mother and Christ, we see the mother and we, again, like a child, follow her attention, and her attention, not by her eyes, but by her gesture, is back towards Christ, as if to say, look at him, you need him. So this recursive, almost dialogue between the icon and the viewer is just so striking, and to open that up in the context of a conversation like this about why this is so important and so on, that's in our that's already there, So I'm totally with you. I think, we should be reclaiming, but also resurrecting or restoring, what's already there, because it's quite poignant.
Brett, this has been a fantastic talk. And again, I say this too often, but truly we could go on for another hour. But I want to make sure if people want to find out more about this, where can you direct them to? Because this is such important work that I'm afraid we're only now getting to talking about, and I know you guys and your what you're doing at McGrath is so vital. So please let people know where they can go find out more and how they can get more involved in these discussions.
Sure, I would just start at mcgrath.nd.edu. That's mcgrath.nd.edu. And on the conferences page, you'll find the link to our media symposium that we held last week. And so the speakers and the topics are there. And if anyone wants to reach out, my contact information is on the site, and I'd be happy to provide materials from that. We're going to have videotaped versions of those talks available soon. And anyone who wants to have the conversation, I would love to. Diocesan, parish, family, you name it, school. We want to think about what does a parish diocesan ecology look like that comes to grips with all these challenges.
And then I'm not going to let you get off the air without pointing out that you have a book out. It's Appletopia, and then a lot of these things about Steve Jobs and the religious imagery that he uses in there. So they can also go online and find your book as well. Brett, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a great honor, and I hope to have you back at some point.
Thanks so much, Bo. Thanks guys.
Yep.
Well, Bud, another good show wrapped up. The demons that mess with technology couldn't stop us, so way to go on our part. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our families, in our city, our state, our nation, the entire globe, solar system, universe, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if people want to be a part of Iowa Catholic Radio by listening throughout the day, what are some of the things that they need to make sure to pay attention to so that they can participate in our prayer life together?
Alongside your material support, we invite you to pray with us daily. The Rosary is at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., 9:30 p.m. We pray the Angelus at 6 in the morning, and that 9:30 a.m. Rosary is dedicated to praying for our country.
And then out and about in the diocese, we're trying to do a better job of being visible, so we're all over the place, folks. You just need to look out for us on July 23rd on the Indianola leg of Ragbri. We will be broadcasting from St. Thomas Aquinas in Indianola, so check that out. The Iowa Catholic Radio, we'll be there for the Cathedral Concert Series at the Pastoral Center downtown July 26th and 27th. You can learn more at dmdiocese.org. We're going to be out at Sacred Heart Parish in West Des Moines to help Father Chris Hartshorn celebrate 25 years of being ordained a priest. Fantastic. So that's July 27th, immediately after the 4 p.m. Mass. Our Lady of the Americas Festival is Sunday, August 4th, and we'll be there broadcasting from the Iowa State Fair August 8th through 18th. And then also the Men's Stag is coming up Wednesday night, September 18th. That's the 5th annual one. The County Barn in DeSoto from 5 to 9. Learn more about this and everything else at iowacatholicradio.com. And as Bud said, we covet your prayers so that we can continue to do the mission of reaching out the word of Christ to all people at all times, but also material support helps us as well. We're by helping us out monetarily, we not only stay on air, we have all of our local programs, our feed from EWTN, but also we're able to go out to the diocese and provide other services as well. So if you have the possibility and the capacity to keep us in mind with your giving, iowacatholicradio.com, the donation buttons are there. Bud, glad to know that you're feeling better, and glad to know that you ultimately were able to make it on the show on the phone. So I hope you have a good time next week.
Yeah, blessings there in Iowa. Stay cool.
All right, yep, same to you. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.